So when it comes to God, there's a lot of mystery that surrounds him. People conceive of it as mysterious, and you can't really know him. But for me, Lamar, and for Wayne
Yeah.
here, really we have really understood and understood the impact of the character of God in our lives. And in the Christian faith, it's known as the attributes of God. And so for me and for Wayne, we each chose two attributes that we saw that has an impact on us personally, but it's just something that those kind of characteristics are of God are really shown in our lives, and how it really impacts our lives on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think it's important. The daily basis component, impacting our lives on a daily basis part, is really important. Part of why it matters for us to explore the attributes of God in the first place is because God expects us to apply what we know about him in our lives. So it's not about getting information, but more getting applicable information about God so that we can properly navigate our lives as Christians, and if not Christians, understanding why we should explore Christ.
Yeah, man. And so for me, to just start it off real quick, an attribute that's my personal favorite, just as a person, that really has impacted my life and is really relevant is the wisdom of God. And wisdom is really just being able to use information and knowledge in just a skillful way, and even just being able to maneuver in what's good. And
Why wisdom? Why is it your favorite?
it's my favorite because it's one thing to accumulate a lot of information, but it's another thing to be able to step back and say, this is probably good, but it might not be good for me. Or this might be something that looks good now, but ultimately is not good. And so, I have to actually, when sometimes if you learn from experience, you may experience the consequences and you can learn and gain knowledge that way. But when you have wisdom, you can even step back before you even enter into the experience and be able to say, let me make a wise judgment here and not do that. Oh, let me make a wise judgment and do this. And so that's why it really stands out to me.
All right, cool,
And,
cool.
And when it comes to God and just seeing his wisdom, just for me in my life, I know there's a lot that comes with just living life. There's a lot of decisions that you have to make. There's a lot of circumstances that are even beyond your control. And there's just so many ways that life can go. And results can happen. And so for me, just seeing God's wisdom in my daily life is being able to see that even when I'm able to plan my way, many of the plans that we make in our lives as people, as human beings, and yet we're able to see the direction of our steps be made by God because he's wise, and because even if he allows certain things, even if he directs certain things, literally he's able to direct us in wisdom. He's not just saying, oh, go this way, go that way, because I'm just haphazardly doing it like people would do, like normal humans would do or whatever. But he actually has a means by which to do things that's really conducive to your success and well-being.
And then part of what comes to my mind as you share what you're sharing is generally speaking how most people understand wisdom is the application of knowledge, right? And so understanding that God is all-knowing, which is an attribute, his all-knowing nature, which is not necessarily one of the attributes we're going to cover, but since God is all-knowing, right, he's able to apply his wisdom in all areas of my life, the lives of the people around me, the lives of the people that I don't necessarily know, the lives of the people at my job. When bad things happen, but it turns out good, his wisdom, since he knows everything, is impacting everything around me in a good way, since he wants good for us. So that's one of the things that came to my mind. Since God knows everything and wisdom is the application of knowledge, that's why God is able to direct my steps, your steps, right? Like you mentioned, God is directing our steps as we make plans, right? God's able to do that. God's able to direct our steps because he knows where we're going and where we shouldn't be. He's able to apply his wisdom based off of what he knows about us long before we even do or what we want to do.
Right, man. And it's just like, I know it can be hard sometimes to see in life where you may go through situations that are hard. You may go through things where you literally can't explain it. And what helps and gives peace and what gives security is just knowing that there's wisdom that is attached to this. Everything from how God saves us through Christ to how we build our family, the way that we have even a family unit, the way we have built community. There's wisdom just is intertwined with it. If you just look at nature and you just see the way that things are orchestrated, it's just the immense amount of wisdom that he has. It's just really encouraging. And man, so I just really appreciate his wisdom, and I just appreciate, is it something about just the intricacies of life and how God is able to like line them up and like timing and like really being able to help us even apply
exactly
the knowledge that's out there
yeah
in a way that would help us lead a godly life and just a wholesome life.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like without wisdom, nothing that we know will ever really be applicable, right? And this is where understanding God's wisdom helps us understand that God is an applicable God, right? So he is not a distant God that is sitting on a throne detached from his people, from his creation. He is a personal God, personal, applicable. When he does something in your life, it's for your life and the life of the people around, right? So God is not a God that is unapplicable, that is distant, that is disconnected, how many people might understand him to be. So that's why it makes sense. The God's attribute of wisdom is really key to his character, to the kind of God that the Bible describes him to be, an applicable God. He's a personal, applicable God.
Yeah, that's good, man. And so, man, I would love to hear from you. Like, what's one attribute that's really like relevant?
Yeah. So for me, one of the attributes that I think it's important to identify is God's immutability, which is also known within the Christian faith as God's unchanging nature. So within the Bible, which this might be something that confuses a number of people, not everybody, but within the Bible, there are different time periods where it seems like God is doing different things. So, for example, within the Old Testament, the first and largest component of the Bible, within the Old Testament, we have what we call the Mosaic Law, which essentially sets the tone for the entire Old Testament. In the New Testament, it begins with the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, right? And that sets the tone for the entire New Testament. So now, the general understanding of God in regards to the Old Testament is that God is an angry God. But then it seems that he changes in the New Testament, that he's really nice and kind and compassionate in the New Testament. And so that misunderstanding is identified specifically in his attribute of his immutability. God doesn't change in the New and Old Testament. And so we have to understand the how the two connect. And to be more specific, we see God's mercy clear as day within the Old Testament. One example is within the Mosaic Law, specifically in Exodus. This is also mentioned in the book of Leviticus. God says that if you have a garden or you are harvesting fruit, vegetables, so that way you're able to survive, that on the 7th year of the harvest, the 7th year, you are not supposed to glean or farm any of your harvest, specifically for the foreigner and the stranger, right? So both the foreigner and the stranger, right, the people who are not part of God's quote unquote family, are supposed to feed off of the people who are part of God's family. But God is telling them to make sure you do that. Now, why it's important to identify that that's part of the Mosaic Law is that not doing that would be sin. So God is saying not providing for other people would be a sinful thing. If you glean the corners of your harvest without leaving it for the poor and the foreigner. So it's something like that we also see happen within the New Testament. Within the New Testament, what do we see Jesus himself do, right? Jesus, when the people were the 5,000 that were following him. Jesus is God in the flesh. Right. When the 5,000 were following him and his disciples said, send them home. What did Jesus say? Jesus' response to his disciples was, I don't want them to go, essentially. I'm summarizing. I don't want them to go because they are like sheep without a shepherd, right? They don't have food. They can't provide for themselves, just like the poor and the foreigner in Exodus and Leviticus in the Old Testament. Right. And Jesus does what? He multiplies the food so that they are able to survive, and then gives it to his disciples, for them to provide for the people, just like God gave the law for the Israelites to provide for the other people, right? So we see God do the same things in the Old and in the New Testament. His mercy doesn't change. One of the longest chapters in the Old Testament is in the Psalms, has one term that repeats over and over again, and that is God's love is unchanging. So again, the idea that God in the Old Testament is mean and God in the New Testament is kind is inconsistent. God is kind in both the Old and New Testament.
Right, and that's really important, because honestly, that's one of the things. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I can understand why people would see that. The God of the Old Testament is this vengeful God, and he's ready to strike you down, and then Jesus is all full of love and things of that nature. But you would see even in the Old Testament, God says, like, I have loved you with an everlasting love. He would even go in as far as to use a prophet to marry someone who is unfaithful, an unfaithful woman, and literally married, to just show a picture of how much he loves those who don't love him back the same way.
Exactly.
And it's just amazing to see how unchanging God is, because this is the very same God that would punish sin is the same God that would save sinners, that would defend those that are defenseless.
Exactly.
And would reach out for them. Like, you really can see that.
Yeah, exactly. And then another thought story that came to my mind as you were talking was God says that in the Old Testament, again, the Old Testament is where people think God is angry and mean. He tells the Israelites, the what we now call the Jewish people, he says to them that you are not to mistreat a foreigner.
Right.
Why? Because you were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. So God is telling his chosen people to do what? Treat everyone with the same respect that I am treating you. Since I rescued you and you were a foreigner, when foreigners come through, that you are supposed to be nice to them too. So we want to, when we're looking at God's being unmerciful in the Old Testament, we want to remember he's not unmerciful in the Old Testament. He is merciful in the Old Testament. And in the same thing, Jesus sent his disciples into how much of the world? The whole world, preaching the gospel of peace, right? So it's not a matter of, again, God is only focusing on certain people and everyone else is excluded in the Old Testament, that everyone's included in the New Testament, and we see the foreigners included in the Old Testament as well. God wanted all people. We see that a consistent thread throughout the entire Bible.
And just to share real quick, just personally, for me, I went through a time period. I was going to a Christian college and everything, and I literally encountered doubt for the first time in my walk. Been saved since I was young, and encountered that doubt. Why? Because of the Old Testament, because of the things that was said in there, and I couldn't reconcile at the time what was going on. And then I asked him myself, and this is important because you can really ask him. It doesn't have to be like a whole big production. I asked him, God, I don't know if I can believe you anymore. I need you to help me. And I know that you've done these things. I'm just struggling right now. I just need you to help me.
That makes sense.
He literally helped me, and he showed me one of the things he showed me was his immutability. I didn't know the word at the time, but he was really showing me his consistency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, makes sense.